Welcome to another conversation with the Middle East Monitor. Today we are discussing the tragic situation in Gaza and Israel's bombardment in besieged enclave. I have with me one of the world's renowned experts on Gaza, a Norwegian physician and expert, Professor Mads Gilbert. Mads has a broad range of experiences from international humanitarian work. Since the 1970s, he has been actively involved with solidarity work concerning Palestinians and has served as a doctor for several periods in the Palestinian territories and Lebanon. His efforts have been central to leading the city of Tromsø since 2001, to twinning with Gaza. And his books on Gaza war, Eyes on Gaza, has been translated into several languages. I'm really honored and privileged to have Mads with us, who's going to give us his perspectives and updates on what's happening on Gaza and what we know so far, given he's got long connections and contacts with Gaza Health Services. Welcome to the show, Mads. We're really privileged to have you with us.
Thank you so much, brother.
Can you just tell us where you are at the moment and what your plans are for the coming days and weeks?
Yes, I can. I'm now in Cairo, in Egypt, together with a small emergency medical team from the Norwegian NGO NORWAC, Norwegian Aid Committee. We came around a week ago, quickly after the attack started, and we have been staying here in Cairo, trying to provide practical medical help by purchasing needed equipment and drugs from stores in Gaza City and deliver that through our local partners in Gaza City, to in particular Al-Shifa Hospital. And of course, we have been trying every day to enable our further travel to Rafah, the southern border crossing into Gaza. But this has been unsuccessful so far because you need a permission from the Egyptian higher security organs. We have robust support from the Norwegian embassy here and from the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs, and our mission is funded by the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs. So to sum up, we are in Cairo. We are waiting hour by hour for an opening, a glitch in the closure of Rafah. But as you may know, the viewers may know, Rafah has been and is still closed. And to our knowledge, there was bombing during the last 24 hours. And we have seen pictures of quite a bit of destruction on the border buildings, the border passing buildings themselves. So in order to get actually to the southern part of Gaza, which is the only way to get into Gaza now, you need to cross the Sinai Desert. You can travel there by car. It will take you 6 to 7 hours if you don't have too many checkpoints and stops. But once you get there, of course, that's the next hindrance to get through the border station and into Palestine, into Gaza. And we do not have, as of yet, the permission. And we know also that nothing gets in and nothing or nobody gets out at Rafah for the time being. So we are here and trying to do what we can, encouraging our colleagues and friends in the healthcare in Gaza. We communicate with them hour by hour. We try to do advocacy. We give a lot of interviews like this one, and we try to disseminate the updates from the UN and from the Minister of Health in Gaza. So that's the little we can do now, but the situation is, of course, not serious. It's not difficult. It is a catastrophic disaster. It's a catastrophic disaster, what's going on in Gaza now.
So it is a catastrophe. And so what is the update now? And you've been sending a lot of updates you've been receiving from your contacts inside Gaza. What can you tell us about the death and casualties and the wounded inside Gaza?
Well, the sad and horrifying numbers are increasing hour by hour. So I am not sure if I have the absolutely latest update, but the latest number we have is that the number of war wounded, has passed 10,000 Palestinians in Gaza. The number of killed Palestinians in Gaza has passed 3,000. And it is important to remember that pretty stably, around 60% of the killed and of the wounded are women and children. So the mortars are full. The hospitals are overwhelmed. And even in a well-organized, well-supported Western modern society, the task of undertaking life-saving surgery and emergency medicine for 10,000 wounded is almost impossible to imagine. Now, add to that the occupiers, Israel has turned off the light in Gaza. They have turned off the water. They have turned off the fuel supplies to the generators. They have turned off the medical supplies, that is both medicines, drugs, and medical equipment and disposables. And Gaza was, before this started a week ago, Gaza was already on their knees healthcare-wise, with only 40% in stock of the essential drug list. I was in Gaza last time in June this year for 2 weeks, teaching and doing research and following up on patients. And I could see, as I've seen for so many years, the last 25 years, a healthcare system that is deeply on its knees, but with an immensely brave professional staff of nurses, of doctors, of X-ray technicians, of janitors, of cooks, of paramedics and ambulance drivers, with the little they have, to undertake a human care for all these people.
So the line isn't quite clear, but I think we can manage. Let's just persevere. I was going to ask you. I mean, we know.
Right. I wonder if that is. I think it's because I have the. Is it better now?
It's better now.
Is it better now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So going back to the wounded, we're not seeing the full picture, of course, here in the West and elsewhere. It's very difficult to know exactly the number of casualties, the death, and the way they are being killed. I mean, from what you know and what you are seeing of the type of injuries that are happening in Gaza, what do these injuries reveal about the kind of tactics Israel is using? Can you tell us more about that?
Well, I think it's important to bear in mind that Israeli generals always say that, quote unquote, 90% of our missiles hit the intended target, unquote. I have been in Gaza during the attacks in 2006, 2009, 2012, and 2014. And during all these attacks, the Israeli military are very outspoken about the precisionness of their attacks. And it's important to have that in mind when you hear that there are more than 10,000 wounded and 60% of them are children and women. Now, there will be two main types of injuries. One type comes from the collapse of buildings. And those injuries will be like we see in earthquakes, actually. It will be women and children and elder and adults, civilians who are trapped in concrete buildings that collapse either from direct hits or from bunker busters or indirect power blows from the pressure waves from the immensely large explosive the Israelis are dropping from the skies. These injuries are what we call crush injuries. They will be fractures, they will be muscle destruction, and they will be damages to the abdominal cavity, the chest cavity, and the skull. These are complicated and often quite extensive injuries, and they can cause very severe complications because of the destruction of tissue. And the destruction of tissue will release tissue substances into the blood, which again can cause lung problems, breathing problems, and not at least kidney problems, because these substances from the crushed muscles will clog the kidneys. So you will have acute kidney failure that will need hemodialysis. So that's one group, the crush injuries from the collapsing buildings. The other type of injury will be the injuries caused by projectiles, fragments, shrapnels, and direct hits. And you know, the type of weapons the Israelis are using are often with a large amount of shrapnels being released, like a swarm of shrapnels. And these shrapnels are small, but travel at a very high speed, and they are extremely heavy and extremely sharp. So they will cut through your, whatever you're dressed in, a shirt or a coat or a trouser, and it will cut through your flesh, your subcutaneous tissue, and into the same three cavities, the skull, the chest, and the brain, and the abdomen. And when they penetrate, they will open blood vessels, rupture up blood vessels, and you will have a very dangerous situation with multiple bleedings in these three cavities. And they will need time-consuming exploration of every hit of the shrapnels, and they will need exploration of these three cavities in order to find and stop the bleeding points. That is also consuming and pretty advanced surgery, which needs, of course, to be done in a timely manner, because you quickly bleed to death. So the bleeding has to be stopped. And then, of course, you have a third group of minor injuries from stone, sand, dirt that is being thrown into high speed, hitting the bodies. And you will have falling, you know, people fall when they run, they will have small fractures, and they will have minor injuries. Again, you have to bear in mind that 68% of the 2.2 million in Gaza are below 25 years old, and around 1 million are defined as children, meaning they are below 18 years. So a large number of the injured will be children. And pediatric injuries are extremely challenging and difficult to treat. A child is not a small adult, so you need to have special equipment for the anesthesia. You need to have special equipment for the surgery. And as a child is growing, you need to do a long array of multiple surgeries during the convalescence in order to amend the growing of the pediatric of the child's body. And in addition, of course, the development of the injuries in a child is very swift, because they will quickly lose blood in an amount that will cause a development of shock and hypotension. And also they will quickly develop breathing difficulties. So I can only try to imagine the kind of tasks that my colleagues are faced with in the different hospitals in Gaza. I've seen it so many times, and the sheer number this time, more than 10,000, makes me gasp, actually. I wrote a book about the 2014 attack. I'm happy you mentioned the book we wrote after the 2009 attack, The Eyes in Gaza. I also wrote the book after the 2014 attack, which is called Night in Gaza. If I'm going to write a book after this attack, it will probably be titled Death in Gaza.
I mean, I hope you get to write that book and document and record as your testimony of what's happening in Gaza, and no one is better suited than you are. I mean, so because there is the humanitarian corridor, I mean, what are the chances of people who suffer the first type of injury and the second type of injury actually surviving? I mean, normally if there is a humanitarian corridor, there is support, there is assistance, emergency assistance. With that not being available, do you expect anyone who suffer from the first types of injury and second types of injury to actually survive?
Look, the Palestinian medical staff, in particular the surgical emergency staff, meaning surgeons and anesthesiologists and ICU staff, they are, unfortunately, among the most experienced and skilled in the world. They have an immense experience with treating large number of war casualties. So they know to do this difficult task that is called in French triage or prioritizing. I just saw from one of my very experienced surgical colleagues in Gaza saying that we only treat people who respond when you talk to them. If you're unconscious, if you're without signs of life, you are not being treated. So that's the first filter to survive, is to have signs of life. You know, in UK, in Norway, if you have a traffic accident and somebody is brought in with an ambulance helicopter or a clever ambulance crew, they might have started resuscitation. And then we have a huge surgical team in the OR with all sorts of life support instruments. We can use the ventilator, we can use the cardiopulmonary bypass machine, we can use the ECMO machine, kidney treatment machinery, all of these. And we will go on and go on and go on until all possibilities are expanded and there is still no life. You can't do that in a war situation. You have to pick those who you can save with some simple, swift, and direct treatment to stop the bleeding, to open the airways, and to find the injuries and just give them life-saving first aid. Given the situation now, the doctors already say that they have patients that they see are dying who could have been saved if the capacity has not been diminished by the siege and by the lack of electricity, equipment, supplies, water, and food. The capacity is overstretched, and don't forget that these medical staff have been working around the clock for 8 days now. And today it was issued a fairly dramatic appeal from the Minister of Health in Gaza, appealing to all international health workers to come to the assistance of the medical system in Gaza. And that appeal should be listened to and followed up. And I think we really need to have a huge international convoy of medical staff, medical supplies, and supportive people to get into Gaza to amend and to help the staff working there and to try to save more lives. But as you ask the question, the simple answer is people are currently dying in Gaza because of lack of capacity, because of the extent of the injuries and the exhaustion of the medical system.
We are, of course, at the early stage of what will be a much prolonged and bloody Israeli invasion. And you mentioned that you've been in Gaza a number of times, from 4 times, if I recall. So with your expensive time spent in Gaza, how does this current conflict compare to the previous ones? And of course, we're at the early stage, and there seems to be a completely different mood around what's happening in Gaza, not just politically, but also in terms of Israel's desire to inflict vengeance and and damage and harm to the Palestinians. It's a completely different situation, it seems to be, in this case. So how would you compare this to your previous 4 times that you were in Gaza?
I've been in Gaza 3 to 4 times a year for the last 25 years. To teach, to try to contribute to the development of the healthcare, to do research, to follow up on patients, as I said. And in addition, I've been there during these last large attacks. I have never, ever seen anything like this. This is not a disaster. This is a catastrophic disaster. And this is such a large attack on the human habitat with 2.2 million people that the whole human ecology is falling apart in the society. Roads, power lines, sewer systems, policing, food supply chains, welfare for elderly and disabled, schools, everything that we as humans have around us in our daily life, which makes us human and makes the human habitat livable, is now being crushed. When I see the drone pictures from Gaza City, a city I love so much, it looks like Hiroshima, parts of it, completely devastated, completely flattened, or Dresden, 1945. I think I said the other day that Gaza 2023 makes Dante's Inferno look like a tea party. This is beyond comprehension. Mm. And I am not aware of any military situation in a large city. I remember Gaza City has 600,000 inhabitants and is the capital of Gaza. I cannot remember having seen any such extensive damage. Now, I was born after the Second World War, so it might have been pictures from the carpet bombing of Germany, but this carpet bombing is so devastating that it is hard to understand how you can even operate the hospitals. Now, on top of that comes the fact that the Israeli army, the most moral army in the world, as they call themselves, are systematically attacking healthcare. They are bombing and rocketing ambulances. We have numerous examples of that. I don't have the updated number of killed paramedics and healthcare providers and doctors. They are bombing directly to and around the medical facilities, healthcare clinics, the UN primary healthcare clinics, and the large and the small hospitals. And this bombing in the perimetry of the hospital will make the roads useless, so it's extremely hard to access the hospital with the wounded. And of course, the physical destruction around the hospital will also severe water lines, sewage lines, and power lines. So the whole infrastructural precondition to run the healthcare is also being attacked, and they have, as most of the viewers will know, threatened and commanded the Palestinians to evacuate the hospitals. However, both the leadership in the Ministry of Health, who is responsible for the large governmental hospitals, and the leadership in Palestine Red Crescent Society, the Palestinian Red Cross, who is running a number of facilities, in particular the large Al-Quds, Mustashfa Al-Quds, or Jerusalem Hospital in Gaza City, they have officially declared that they will not evacuate the hospitals because they say it is a sure death sentence to their patients. And now we are into a very, very sensitive and in many ways a very naked moral question. Who can you attack? Who can you actually bomb? Who can you actually use your weapons against? And international law is very clear on this. Hospitals cannot be attacked. And it seems like, from what we have heard from the governmental representatives in Israel, they do no longer consider, or did they ever consider, Palestinians as equal humans. I guess it was the Minister of Defense who said that we are fighting human animals. I remember Sharon, the previous, both Minister of Defense, responsible for the Sabra and Shatila massacre and sentenced for that, and later Minister of Defense, he called the Palestinians the insects. Yeah. The insects.
I mean, so dehumanization is always a precursor to genocide and ethnic cleansing. That's always the case.
Exactly. Yeah. I was going to come to that point exactly. So what we see now is actually human morality and even very basic decency is falling apart. And I condemn any attack on civilians. I want Hamas and the Palestinians, as well as the Israelis, to be investigated with the same kind of detailed legal investigation as the perpetrators of Srebrenica and other war crimes in ex-Yugoslavia were prosecuted, examined, and punished. But the problem is that that never happens with the Israeli army, because they refuse to be judged by the international community and the legal system. They refuse to stand a trial in the International Criminal Court, and they are never held accountable for their war crimes. I've seen it first-handed. I've seen the killed and the wounded children in the hundreds over the years. I mean, and the Western world, they have blood on their hands because they have been allowing the colonial settler project of the state of Israel to occupy a people for 75 years and treat them as inhumans, as they now vocally say they are human animals. And given that attitude, you can do what you want with them, they think. We don't think that.
So what do you make of the order, the instruction for Palestinians to move in mass, just flee North Gaza? If you know hospitals cannot be abandoned, the people who are injured and wounded cannot be removed from the hospitals, and they have to remain. What is the purpose of an order that cannot be enforced? I'm being a cynic here. What do you think they're trying to achieve by announcing, oh, we've told the Gazans to go to south of Gaza, as though they're being merciful, they're being kind, they've opened a corridor for 1.1 million Palestinians to find shelter and save themselves from death and destruction, as an order that can never be implemented and enforced and will never be accepted by Palestinians at large. So what is the point of such an order?
I think it's, well, I'm not in the head of the Israeli strategists and the military leaders and political leaders, so I just have to answer you from what I think. I think, number one, this is a deliberate, military forced expulsion of a large population under occupation, which is strictly forbidden according to international law. This is not an evacuation. An evacuation is when the British government is sending a couple of airplanes to an earthquake or a tsunami region to bring home their citizens. This is a forced expulsion of a population with the intention to empty northern Gaza. Now, the Palestinians remember what happened in 1948 when they were expelled from what was their homeland, and 750,000 then, not 1.1 million, but 750,000 Palestinians were scared, forcefully expelled, and left their villages. And the Israelis came in and said, oh, there's nobody here, we can take it. And the rest is history. They never were allowed to come back and to have their property and their land back. So I think that's one thing, to empty northern Gaza of Palestinians and move in with the ground invasion, bomb everything back to flattened land and take it over and include it in the rest of occupied Palestine that Israel controls. The second objective, I think, is to try to make a clear back with regards to international law. Well, we warned them. We told them, leave. You know, they've had this tactique for many years. It's called the knock-on roof. They fire an uncharged rocket on top of the roof of an apartment building, which means in a minute or so, 3-4 minutes, this building will be collapsed with the bombing. So leave. The knock-on roof is also a way to say, oh, we are abiding to international law. We are warning the people to get in safety, and then we can bomb whatever we want. No, you cannot, because these are civilian structures. And you have 3 important rules in international law. It is distinction, it is proportionality, and it is precaution. Distinctions means that you have to distinct very clearly between military and civilian object. And of course, an apartment building is a civilian object. Proportionality means that you should use the same amount of force against your enemy as the enemy is using against you. Now, the Palestinians do not have air force, they don't have navy, they don't have tanks, they don't have F-16 or combat helicopters. So, and the third thing is precaution. Precaution. And that is if a target could be a mixed military and civilian target, the civilian takes priority over the assumed military purpose of the target. All these rules are in order to protect the civilian population. Now you can, and I'm not a lawyer, but I read intensely what the legal experts are saying. And I would recommend to your viewers to read a book, a monography by British academic geographer Craig Jones has written a book which is called The War Lawyers, describing how both the US Army and the Israeli Army have lawyers who are judging every single target online in real time and saying yes or no to bomb it. So they are trying, at least they are trying to keep ahead of criticism of them being violating international law, as they portray themselves as the most moral army in the world. So I think these orders to leave northern Gaza has these twofold purposes. Number one, to empty northern Gaza. And number two, to say, we warned you, and then we can do what we want. Now, bear in mind, not 1.1 million have left. I think the last number is like 400,000 have left northern Gaza and moved to southern Gaza, barefoot, on foot, on donkey carts, on bicycles, on trucks, on whatever they can find. Remember, the fertility rate in Gaza is high. I think it's 4.3 now, children per woman, married woman. So these are large families with lots of children, having to hurriedly leaving their homes and travel south to an unknown destiny. And also we have information that many are moving back to the north, both because the situation in the south is, similarly dire as in the north, and also because I think of the because of the experiences and the historical knowledge they have of what is the purpose of the state of Israel. It is the Eretz Israel. It is to expand, and this may be part of the expansion plan.
It is heartbreaking what you're describing. And just before we finish, the final question to Professor Mads. I mean, given your medical expertise and experience, what actions do you want the international community and the Arab world to take, not only to address the humanitarian catastrophe that's unfolding, but also generally, to end Israel's ongoing aggression? What do you think needs to happen?
Well, obviously, it is twofold. It's political pressure from governments and states who say to the US and to Israel, stop it. Find a way to establish a ceasefire, open humanitarian corridors, not only one, but many, lift the siege of Gaza, protect the civilians. The Norwegian government has been very clear in their condemnation of the siege. They, of course, also criticize breaches of the international law from the Palestinians as well as from the Israelis. And they continue and increase their humanitarian support for the civilian population in Gaza. That is one track, important. Now, the other track is, of course, that we, you, I, everyone can influence the times we're living in. And I think now is the time to stand up for humanity, for the decency in this world, and say, I will not take this anymore. And that means to get educated, to be informed, to be on top of the facts, and not only the crazy rumors in the fog of war. We used to say that truth is the first victim of war. And there are so many propaganda stories out because the force that controls the narrative in many ways controls the future. So I think the struggle on the narrative is extremely important to participate in. Discuss with your friends, discuss with your family, your neighbors, get knowledgeable, read the UN statements, which are very graphic these days, full of other channels than the usual Western channels. Look at, anything from Al Jazeera, English, to other Arab and Southern news outcasts, and stand up and voice your concern, voice your protest, voice your human attachment to the civilian population in Gaza and in the West Bank. They're killing like crazy in the West Bank too now. This is a historic moment, and we all will be judged by the history books. We have dark hours in European history where we turned our back to people being prosecuted. They were being chased down and killed, and they were being murdered in awesome, horrible genocides. And in many ways, Europe stood idle by or turned their back to it. We cannot have that repeated. Now, to blame and to scapegoat a whole population as terrorists is a way to make a we, us, and them, which is always the first step to genocide. And I repeat, I condemn, I protest against any attack on civilians, be it from Ukrainian resistance forces in Ukraine, or from Russian occupation forces in Ukraine, or from Israeli occupation forces in Palestine, or from Palestinian resistance against Israelis. But the proportions are totally out of balance. I have numbers I've been counting for years during these attacks. We have published, we have researched, we have a number of publications in The Lancet, in British Medical Journal. We have tried to establish an evidence-based solidarity, as I call it. Evidence-based solidarity. Look at the numbers and the facts and the academic studies on this. It's always disproportionate. During, I think it was during the numbers we counted from 2006 until 2014, the ratio of killed Israeli children to Palestinian children was 1 to 100. Now, no Israeli child should get killed in this occupation, but nor should 100 Palestinian children get killed. So I think for good people who feel helpless, get knowledgeable, take a moral stand, organize, write, read, be a decent human being, take part in history, protest, demonstrate, and do not let the authorities shut you up by saying, no, you cannot carry a Palestinian flag, or no, you cannot have this protest, or no, you cannot voice support for the Palestinians, because then you are an anti-Semite. This is all part of the Hashbara project, the Israeli propaganda machine. And I'd like to finish by saying, like the Palestinian ambassador to the UN said just before the weekend after the closed meeting in the UN Security Council, he said, this did not start last Saturday with the first killing of an Israeli. This started 75 years ago, or maybe even 100 years ago, with the systematic oppression, dehumanization, and colonization of the Palestinian people. That is the core thing. As a doctor, I'm not treating symptoms. I have to diagnose, and I have to find the root cause of the medical problem that somebody has. In this situation, we cannot treat the symptoms, the wounded, the bleeding. We cannot just send doctors in. It's not going to solve the situation. We need to understand the root cause. And the root cause is the occupation, it is the settler colonial project, and it is the apartheid of the State of Israel. I'm sorry to say, I'm a doctor, but most of this is not about iron deficiency or skimmed milk or training. This is about the political preconditions for the life of the Palestinians under occupation. And that is all the responsibility of the Israeli government and those who support them in their atrocities. This is not a difficult conflict. This is not a difficult conflict. This is a difficult endless occupation that must end. And what are the world's leaders thinking will be the next step after this? Do they think it's over with this? How will this impact the regional stability to the extent that there is a stability? How will this influence the world at large? This is probably the beginning of a new and dark era, both in the Middle East, first of all for the Palestinians, but also for all other oppressed people who are exposed to the so-called world powers and their colonialism.
So Mads, thank you so much for providing such moral clarity and giving us a stark description of the reality that presents us. You have nothing but our highest praise and admiration. I wish you all the best and safety. We pray for your safety when you, inshallah, hopefully do enter into Gaza. And
thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me on your program, Nasim. And I'd like to reiterate, as I always do, two things. This is not a difficult conflict. This is a difficult occupation that needs to be resolved. The Palestinians need to have access to a safe, peaceful, and human life. And number three, I am no hero. The heroes are in Gaza. Palestinian healthcare workers, the nurses, the doctors, the paramedics, the students, and their endless solidarity with their patients and the moral examples that they set to the world. Thank you. I have a final word to the brave people of Gaza. Now is the time to say, Kulona Gaza, Kulona Gaza, Kulona Gaza. We stand with you. You are not alone. You are not alone. Shukran kathir.
On that note, with our prayer and thoughts for the people of Gaza, thank you so much, and thank our viewers for tuning in. Bye-bye.